So I'm just going to move on to this really interesting study that I think you'll all be interested in, that we have just recently published as a book chapter. What we were really interested to do is, I suppose, at the current state of the evidence, that there are limited, I suppose, the idea of randomized controlled trials existing in this area. So the idea is, before you spend a huge amount of money on conducting a randomized controlled trial, you can conduct what's known as a feasibility study. And what that does is that looks to see, is the intervention acceptable to the people it's targeting? Is it of interest to them? And is it practical for them to engage in it? Do they want to engage in it? So you're looking at things like recruitment numbers, you're looking at things like people actually finding wherever the intervention is taking place accessible to them in the, in terms of public transport. And you're also looking at conducting this idea of a limited efficacy testing. So that's to see, does the intervention have the potential to change areas, particularly we focus strictly in relation to people's mental health. So within this study, we looked at, does it have the potential to impact stress levels, rumination, and also well-being? So what we used was what's called a mixed method design. So that involves us using quantitative methods, which involves numbers and measuring, and then qualitative methods, which also, I suppose, looks at people's experiences and their perceptions and their values and what the experience of the intervention was like for them. So we assessed feasibility in many different ways. We conducted a focus group with participants. We looked at measuring their outcomes, their attendance rates, and we also looked at conducting what's called a process evaluation. So the group that we decided to target with this intervention was individuals who are aged 18 plus and people who are experiencing self-reported occupational or general stress. So they had identified, I suppose, a particular issue or difficulty or health problem that they had, and then we were looking at developing an intervention to target that particular challenge. So we looked at measuring rumination, as I mentioned, using the rumination reflection questionnaire. We stress using psychological stress measure, and then well-being using this really nice scale from the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. And what we did, I suppose, was we looked very simply just at the differences between individuals before and then after they took part. So the idea of getting a sense of, is it possible? Now, we couldn't control for many other variables, but I suppose this wasn't a trial. It was to develop evidence and to develop a rationale for getting a funding for a trial at a later stage. And then from the qualitative perspective, we looked at written reflections of people's experiences. And we also conducted the focus group, as I mentioned. And then that data was analyzed using thematic analysis. So this is the intervention itself. It was over 6 weeks, and each week there was a 2-hour session took place. And it was conducted in forests in Dublin and Wicklow, which are, Dublin is the capital of Ireland, and then Wicklow is a county just underneath. So it's a more rural setting. The intervention components, so this is, I suppose, how we define forest therapy. They included nature connection interventions, mindfulness, gentle physical activity, solo time, and there was also a group reflection. So the participants in the study were all female, which is interesting. There's definitely an increase in interest, I think, amongst females in this whole area. Their mean age was 45.5, and 7 individuals completed all components. So even there, you get a taste of the fact that there were 3 people who didn't complete. So in a feasibility study, you're wondering, why was that? And what we found, even though the data obviously was a very small sample, but we found these statistically significant improvements, and they were across all the outcomes that we measured: stress, rumination, and well-being. And the effect sizes that we actually found were quite strong. And then what was really interesting was when we looked at the qualitative data in terms of both the reflections and the focus group, a number of teams, I suppose, were generated when we looked at analyzing the data. And when you analyze qualitative data, it's really important to, I suppose, stay true to your data, but also to try and interpret and figure out the essence of what people are trying to communicate. And then you try to synthesize and bring those themes and those ideas together to create these kind of larger, broader, all-encompassing themes that describe the experience of participants. So we found in the reflections that connectedness, just being, awareness, and nature as healer, they summarize the essence of people's experiences. We found during the focus group that connectedness was also replicated, but there was a shift in terms of a focus on integration, relaxation, and then support, especially the support of the group.